this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa, and let's go on an adventure.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. Today I'm speaking with Nicola-Jane Breton, who lives in Western Australia. Nicola and I have worked together and we participated in a course together a few years ago. And Nicola also attended Emerson College, which is where I'm headed to in February 2024. And it was really great to hear her experience about that. Nicola works with communities with a community organisation and uses storytelling in that organisation to help empower people to find their voice. I hope you enjoy the interview. Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode. Our guest this week is Nicola-Jane Breton, who is in Western Australia. So, hi, Nicola.
Hi, Ali.
Let's start off by just telling us how you got your start in storytelling. How did it come about?
It's always hard, isn't it, to find the very beginning of something. I mean, I could go right back to my childhood and the endless hours spent writing and acting out stories and listening to my mother tell tales. Or I could go back to my early 20s when I joined a healing storytelling group. We used to write mythopoetic tales in response to a challenge that someone was facing and then tell them a story and create a healing ritual around that. And I was also a playgroup leader at that time, a Steiner playgroup leader. But I really didn't feel confident as a storyteller. I longed to be able to tell stories, but I couldn't get past the needing to memorize and never feeling like I could really, be right inside the story and unself-conscious. And so I, at some point, just put it all aside and thought, no, that's not my path. Did a whole bunch of really boring jobs for years.
As we do.
In administration and public service and so forth. And then became a creative writing teacher in my 40s and got involved with some oral storytelling projects down in Denmark. And then in 2018, I went to England, to the UK, including Scotland, with my husband and my eldest son. And towards the end of our stay there, we were in Orkney for 3 days. And we went on a bit of a tour with a local guide, and he told us that his wife was a traditional storyteller and they had a traditional storytelling centre. And so we went on our last night in Orkney just before catching the ferry back to the mainland. And I was just completely and utterly entranced. It was like something in me had been asleep for years and it woke up and said, "Here I am. And I want to be part of your life." And something in me just went, where is storytelling in this world? Like, why aren't there any storytellers? How do you become a storyteller? And there was just something so alive about it that you don't get when you read a book or when you watch a movie. And I was hooked from that moment.
Do you remember what story they told?
I remember that she told 2 tales. One was one of the traditional tales about the Selkies, Yeah. I can't remember exactly which one, but quite possibly the one many of us have heard about, the man who marries the Selkie who, later on gets her skin back and returns to the sea and leaves her children behind. And the other one was about the Finn people. I haven't been able to find a story quite like it. I've kind of wondered about it since then, but they were people that lived beneath the sea. And the stories she told came from the Northern Islands. So I think they were a blend of Scottish and Norwegian, which is what my ancestry is.
Isn't it funny how we gravitate to the stories of our ancestry? I find that really,
Yeah.
really fascinating. So I find it also interesting that the story that awoke that in you was a Selkie story, which is a transformation story, really, isn't it? Did you
Yeah.
feel that you went through a transformation in that moment, or in the time that came after?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it turned my life kind of upside down and inside out, because I was working for a publisher at that time and had been for a while, and really loved that job and felt very safe in it. And after I came back from Orkney and decided I wanted to be a storyteller and went searching for mentors and courses, something in me wasn't fully satisfied anymore in that job. It really turned my life upside down and inside out. I was working for a publisher at that time, a little publisher in Perth, very content really with my work. And when I came back from Orkney on this quest to discover how I could become a storyteller and who could mentor me and teach me, something in me was no longer completely content with that work, and I knew that my life was about to go through a big change.
So what have you done since that moment? Like what has been your journey to get to where you are now?
Well, when I got back from Scotland, I did some research into my ancestry and discovered that many of my ancestors had come from Shetland and Orkney, and also
Wow.
from Norway, which I knew that already, but I didn't know about the Orkney connection. So that was interesting. And I went hunting for storytelling teachers. I found Jaya Penelope, who we both know well,
Yep.
and then she put me on to Randy Jones, the Canadian storyteller who happened to be visiting Perth at the time. And also around that time, I phoned up my friend Sylvia Lehman, who's a theatre director down in Denmark, and she and I had worked together on lots of spoken word productions and creative projects over the years. And I just phoned her out of the blue and I said, Sylvia, how would you feel about creating an oral storyteller development program with me? They don't seem to be any courses here. I want to learn how to be an oral storyteller. And maybe if we put together my creative writing teaching with your theatrical production experience, we could make something up. And she said, sure. I said, don't you want to think about it? No, but she thought about it, but then she did say yes. And we managed to get a grant to bring Randy Jones down to Denmark for a weekend workshop, which was like an introduction to storytelling and ritual.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it was a wild weekend that began a whole kind of thing down in Denmark. And
Oh no,
interesting.
don't stop on that. Tell me about the thing in Denmark.
Well, I think it sparked a lot of interest for people in rites of passage and ritual. There was already some interest there, and definitely in storytelling. So after that weekend, we had more applicants than we could handle for the program that we were offering, which we had completely made up out of the tops of our heads. And we started with 12 of us, including me and Sylvia, and our plan right from the beginning was to participate as well as to facilitate and design the program. And we started with, I think, a 4-day weekend, and then we had a weekend every month because I was living in Perth, so I'd come down
Once a month.
so there was like 7, I think it was over a period of 7 months after that initial weekend with Randy. And yeah, we really took them on a wild goose chase all over the possible country of storytelling because of her theatrical background with scripts and my writing background. And we had them writing like really long stories that just would have been impossible to tell as oral stories.
Yeah.
And we also used the book, I think it's called The Way of the Storyteller, by Ashley Ramsden and Sue Hollingsworth. It was a fabulous journey, and we all really bonded with each other. And by hook or by crook, we found our way through to the point where I think 9 of us performed at Brave New Works, and it was fabulous. So
what you were doing there though was building community, were you not? Isn't for you, my understanding of you and your place in story, it's really about community building. Would that be right?
Yes. Yeah. I think right from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to, although that particular project was pointing towards a performance outcome, my original vision and the vision that's carried me all the way through has been about giving storytelling back to the people. That storytelling doesn't just have to be a high performance art in which you have years and years of training and skills and experience, that it's something that we can do around the fireside with our families and our friends, and that we can all do, but we've just forgotten that we can do it. So I wanted to make it accessible, and I wanted, anyone who really wanted to do it to feel like they could do it in their own way, and they didn't have to be like this storyteller or like that storyteller.
They could just be themselves and telling a
Yeah,
story. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so what have some of the outcomes been from that initial project in Denmark? Have you had other things flow on from that?
Yes. So that group met for a while after that and then got interrupted by COVID. So there was a long hiatus. But recently, two of the storytellers that were part of that program, including Sylvia and another chap named Jeff Atkinson, have started a monthly storytelling gathering and performance at Denmark Arts. So they've had two so far, and I just went down for the second one, which was Tales from Africa. And there were about, I think the first time they had about 35 people. When I was there, there were over 30 people, and there was a lot of enthusiasm and aliveness in the audience. It felt like people were really into it. They wanted more of it. They wanted to learn how to do it themselves. And it was just so exciting. It was really everything that I hoped for that would come out of the Denmark project, that there would be this ongoing nurturing of storytelling in the community.
Yeah. I can hear the emotion in your voice there. It sounds like it's a really deep passion for you because of that emotion. And it's got a long tail, like it's not just a thing that happened and that was it. Like it's got this longevity to it, which is wonderful.
Yeah, yes.
So what sort of stories do you like to tell?
That's a good question. I love wonder tales, folk tales, myths. I probably have got about 20, not that many stories that I know really well, maybe about 20 up my sleeve, and they're a mixture. So yeah, there's some myths, folk tales, wonder tales, different countries,
Do
and
you have a favorite?
a favorite, gosh.
Or a favorite couple?
I probably have got a couple of favorites. One I just told. So one of them is a myth. It's one of it's actually a folk tale, but it contains the tales of a myth about the Cailleach. And I studied her while I was at Emerson. We haven't talked about that, but when I went to Emerson in 2020 to do their Storytelling Beyond Words course, as the myth component of the course, I chose to look at the Cailleach, and I wrote a big, long, epic poem about her. And I also discovered what tales I could, and found this particular one, but it's called The Dream Keepers.
Oh, wow.
And it's about the Cailleach and her husband and a young girl who sort of wanders by accident into their cave and asks for a night's shelter from the mist. And in response is told that they won't give her that, but they will give her shelter for a year and a night if she'll stay and help the old woman with her jobs. And so she stays, and her life gets completely turned around. And when she comes back down into the ordinary world again, she can't find her way back to where she was, and she has a whole new destiny kind of awaiting her.
I bet that mirrors your life as well.
It's relatable.
Yeah, well, I think, in selecting the stories, I mean, there's thousands upon thousands of stories to choose from, and there's something in them that I think that something in our hearts resonate for us in our lives, I think, and that's what I've found with stories that I've chosen. And it seems to mirror our life or mirror something that we need. Has been my experience of it. Would that be true for you as well, do you think?
Yeah, I feel like it helps me to make sense of my life. I did have an experience a little like the story I just described in
Yeah.
my early 20s, where I met a woman and a man who became my spiritual teachers for a few years. And it was a kind of a weird, almost slightly culty experience. But there was so much that I've carried forward from that changed the direction of my life, that I'm also incredibly grateful. And I think that learning that story helped me to look back and see the gifts in the experience, see that life sometimes carries us into very troubled waters that feel difficult, and where it's easy to feel like a victim or feel like you've been misled or tricked somehow. And to realize that so often, even the trickster character in stories is actually bringing a gift of transformation.
Yeah.
And that without those troubled passages, maybe we'd just be stuck in the same old rut otherwise.
For sure. So let's go back to Emerson, because you were lucky enough to go in 2020, and then, something happened in the world, that thing that, we pretend didn't happen. So how did you find that, having to have this dream to study and learn, and then have to go online, and then put in the pandemic and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, it was such as you would know, because you're currently going through the process of fundraising for your
Yes.
trip to Emerson, that
Yeah.
it was well beyond my financial capacity. And I had a lot of help from friends and community members, who appreciated some of the work that I'd done, and just good friends and family. And so it was just incredible to get there and to be able to be part of this. And then 2 weeks later to be told that I had to get back home, otherwise the border, the borders were about to close and I might not make it back for 9 months or more, was devastating. And at that point, they didn't know whether they were willing, or whether there would be enough people that they'd be able to offer an online version of it. And the future seemed so uncertain at that point, that I didn't know whether I'd be able to ever come back. So I said, yes, I'd love to do the online version, because we were going to be sitting at home anyway for the next few months. And I had that time off work. And yeah, it was fantastic. I can't imagine how wonderful it would have been to have stayed there and done it in person, and all the teachers that we missed out on spending time with.
Yeah.
But what Roy Galore and Carmet Evanzur delivered in the online experience was utterly transformative and magical. There were 9 of us out of the original, I think 15 or 16, who continued online. And it was really a life-changing experience.
Yeah, amazing. Tell me about your friend.
So after the lockdown in 2020, when we were all trying to find our way back into community, I had a ukulele, and I heard that there was a ukulele group round the corner in Wellard, which is where I'm based. And I went up there one Thursday morning, and in the coffee break, I started chatting with Inga Ward, who's the local community builder for Befriend. And she told me that how things work there is that they look for people in the community who have a gift or a passion that they want to share as a volunteer. And then they help you find a venue, they organize your, the public liability insurance, and they promote it to the community. And so I said, oh, well, that's interesting, because I've just finished this course with Emerson, and I know that the best way to learn something is to teach it. So I'd like to teach storytelling. And I wasn't too sure, like how many people would be interested in it. So I decided to alternate it with creative writing, which I knew well. And so that's how I began as a befriend host, as a volunteer. And then in April 2021, a job came up, which my husband and I applied for together. And I found myself in the most amazing organization, which is gift centered. It's based on a living systems idea of how change happens. And we're really encouraged to design our own work that to be in alignment with our gifts, as well as the organization's overall mission and goals, and the particular, the funding goals that we need to meet as well.
So it sounds like the work that you do with Befriend aligns with your values. Would that be? Yeah.
Yes, I think what I love about it is that it's nurturing people to discover their gifts and to realize that every single one of us has a unique gift to give in the world, and that we're all equally precious in that sense. And it's our organization is all about belonging and inclusion, and creating communities where everyone can belong, and in particular those who've been most marginalized. And that's always been a passion of mine, because I felt like an outcast for so much of my life. So I really care deeply about creating spaces where other weirdos and outcasts feel like
Weirdos are the best
welcome.
people.
Yeah.
Weirdos are the best people. I love being a weirdo. I'm very proud of being a weirdo.
Yeah. Me too.
So given you've had, this moment of awakening, and then this inner transformation, as well as outer through story and storytelling, why do you think we still need stories and oral story, traditional story and oral story, and wonder tales and myths, and why do we need those things today? What is the heart of storytelling, do you think?
Yeah, there are so many possible answers to that question. And I think that for me, what really matters most is reconnecting people with their inner wisdom, and which includes our ancestral wisdom, like realizing we're not just these little dots, separate dots, that we're connected to a whole stream of living wisdom that is carried down through the ages, not only within us, in our bodies, but in the stories. And that, there's something really important there, that we can find ourselves in the stories, and they can help us to navigate that whatever challenges we might be facing now. And also, it's something about like finding our voices again. I feel like we've had our voices taken away from us in our culture. There's something about this culture that we live in now that makes everybody very dependent upon the written word and researched evidential kind of sources. And that there's realizing that every single one of us has the ability to tell stories and to make meaning out of our own lives, and that we don't need to be told by a textbook or an expert what a story means, that we can listen to a story and find our own meaning in that, which then will help us with our lives.
Yeah, I did an interview last week, and she was saying how no matter what your intention and what you want someone to get out of the story, they will get out whatever they need from it. And I found that to be a really fascinating piece of wisdom that I hadn't considered, you know, because when I hear a story, that's what I get, but I don't, like, yeah, but you just don't know what you don't know what their story is and where their background is or anything like that. So do you have any advice for people like myself who are just starting in the world of story, and I'm looking for, you know, wisdom from people who know much more than I do?
Oh, Ali, I think you and I are probably much on a par. I think because you also got involved with storytelling before you came to Perth, so we're probably on parallel journeys. And I hesitate to give advice to you because I feel like you're one of my peers, and we both did the storytelling course together with Melissa.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I really appreciated about Melissa Min Harvey's approach was that she threw us in the deep end. So she would tell us a story, and then we would go off into our little groups after some other processes, and we would retell the story, you know, almost immediately. And it was just shockingly wonderful, you know, how quickly people found their own voices in that and realized they don't need to learn a story by rote, that they've each person has their own way of telling a story, and that's what's beautiful, is the
Yeah.
uniqueness that comes
Well,
through.
it's the things you remember, isn't it? You know, I remember when she told Baba Yaga story, and I didn't remember the little doll. In my memory, the doll didn't exist until she said, and then it was like, it is a really important part of the story, and it wasn't part of my recollection of that story. So the skulls
Mm,
were, but the not the doll. So that was really interesting to me to see what we retain in that activity of, you know, what we're doing. I think, you know, in terms of advice for people telling a story, like being in the deep end, I think is good advice though. I think it's really scary to stand in front of people and go, and have I prepared enough, and do I, you know,
mm,
and then be able to just let the story be what it's going to be. I think that's
yeah.
really hard. Yeah. So do you have a process when you're preparing a story?
Uh, yeah, kind of. I really love to hear it first if I can. You know, if there's a
Interesting.
spoken
Yeah.
version of it, there's something about hearing it that it goes in deeper. It's funny because I'll often read a story and think, that's boring. And then I'll hear somebody tell it and think, oh, no, it's not boring. So it seems to come alive in the telling. And that's often when I engage with it. But, you know, I have prepared a few from written versions. I think doing some research, like seeing if I can find other versions of the story,
Mm,
and then maybe researching a little bit into the place that it comes from so that I can weave some of my own descriptive
mm,
detail into it. Journaling about it, like communing with the story and discovering how it speaks to me. What do the images mean to me, and how do they relate to my own life's journey? Because I feel that if when I do that, that I can carry the story in a deeper way within me, and that when I
mm,
speak it, it will come from that depth of relationship.
mm.
And then either usually I do the bones, you know, so I work out like 9 to 12 uh, bones of the story, the key elements, like the little kind of news headings.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that works best for me is if I do if I storyboard it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I've got a template with 12 windows on it. And after I've done the bones, if I can then turn each bone, or at least each scene, into a little symbolic picture, and I'm a terrible artist, so they're not much to look at. But there's something about the process of making the storyboard that really gets the story structure into me.
Yeah, wow. I
And
love
and
that.
then and then I'll write it out. So I'll kind of try and let go of the versions that I've read and heard, and after I've got the structure in my head, I'll write it out by hand in my own and try and weave some of my own details into it. And then I take it for a walk.
So do you walk and tell it in your head as you're going, or?
I walk and say it out loud. So I'm sure
Oh,
I look quite mad. I often think I ought to wear earphones just so that I look like I'm talking on the phone. But I walk around our local bushland gesticulating, you know, doing the gestures and saying the story.
That's wonderful.
Try and calm myself down a bit when I see someone coming.
So, but I imagine that gets the story into your bones, though, because you are walking with the story. It becomes then a somatic experience of being part of you, doesn't it? So I really love that. I really love the storyboarding as well. I think I'm a terrible artist too, but I really like that idea. Yeah, awesome. And so before we finish, I thought we might tell a story. Do you have a story that you might want to tell today?
I do, yes.
All right. Take it away.
So this is a story that I heard first when I was at Emerson. It may have been online, actually. So it's a story from Roy Galore. And it's actually not, I don't imagine it is a traditional folk tale because it probably comes from the 20th century, but it could become one. It has that kind of feeling to it. And it's based on a true story. And then I since did my own little bit of research. I found a book about this. It's from Morocco, and it's about the Moroccan oral storytelling tradition. So I've got a book about that really helped me to flesh out the story a bit more in my own mind. And normally when I tell it, it's an interactive tale, but I'll just tell it all the way through today. Yeah. So I like to open this particular story with a poem from Hafiz. Love is the great work, though every heart is first an apprentice. And an apprentice needs a teacher who has himself charmed the universe to reveal its wonders in his cup. Just such a man was the old storyteller who came every day to the marketplace in Marrakesh. Over one arm he had a tattered patchwork blanket, and in the other he held a little star-shaped lantern. And he would go every day to the same place beneath the leafy orange tree, between the fortune tellers and the snake charmers, lay out his patchwork blanket and tell his stories. Now, this storyteller belonged to an oral storytelling tradition that was said to be over 1,000 years old. Like many of his fellow storytellers, he'd learnt his first stories on the lap of his grandmother. And then, as a young boy, listening to other storytellers in the marketplace, and as a young man, he went traveling through Europe and Asia and the Middle East, gathering stories as another might gather precious gems, polishing them and shaping them into something that he could share in his own way. And some of his favorite stories were illustrated in the patchwork quilt squares and his little quilt that he covered. There was one which showed an old man and an old woman gazing into a deep mountain rock pool in which all of the dreams of the world were reflected. And there was another of a blue djinn leaping across 7 mountains, oceans, and deserts in the blink of the eye. And yet another of a young shepherd boy riding on the back of a great emerald dragon who had ancient storytelling eyes. So every day he went to that same place beneath the leafy orange tree, between the fortune tellers and the snake charmers, and he told stories of all kinds. He told funny jokes, anecdotes, family tales, folk tales, wonder tales, myths, stories of how the world came to be, and stories of how the world would one day come to an end. And as he told his stories, people from the marketplace would gather around him in circles, putting down their heavy baskets and standing with mouths agape and eyes agog as the storyteller would weave them away into all kinds of magical worlds and places and times that they could never have even dreamt of, let alone visited. And sometimes they would lose themselves for just minutes and other times for hours listening to the storyteller. But the world around the old storyteller was changing, it was modernizing. And people were getting busier and busier. The radio came and they could listen to stories at home in their kitchen. And not long after came the television where they could see other worlds transported into their lounge room. And so less and less people had the time or the inclination to stop and listen to the old storyteller. But still, every day he came with his patchwork blanket over one arm, his little star-shaped lantern in the other, lay out patchwork blanket beneath the leafy orange tree, between the fortune tellers and the snake charmers, lit the lantern and began to tell stories of all kinds. He told funny jokes, anecdotes, family tales, folk tales, wonder tales, myths, stories of how the world came to be, and stories of how the world would one day come to an end. And as time went by, less and less people were stopping to listen to the storyteller. But even if there was only one or two or three people, he would always come and tell his stories. And during this time, the marketplace was beginning to change around him as well. There were all sorts of fancy shops coming up and big department stores, and then the cinema came, and then the internet, and people could order whatever they wanted to, almost anything at all from home. They didn't even have to leave their homes. But still, no matter what, the storyteller came every day. And sometimes, in fact, one day he arrived and there was nobody there at all. The marketplace was almost empty, and even the fortune tellers and the snake charmers had gone. But nevertheless, he went and he laid out his patchwork blanket beneath the leafy orange tree. He lit his star-shaped lantern and he began to tell his stories. He told funny jokes, anecdotes, family tales, folk tales, wonder tales, myths, stories of how the world came to be, and stories of how the world would one day come to an end. Day after day he came and nobody was there. Nobody was listening. Nobody stopped to sit and listen to his stories. Nobody seemed to care. But no matter what, he came every day. He closed his eyes and he told all his stories. And I wonder whether you have ever had something that you cared about so deeply, so much, that you've persevered with it, even when nothing around you seemed to support you continuing to do that. Or at what point you might have given up. Well, one day, the old storyteller was sitting under the orange tree with his eyes closed, telling his stories, and a young girl saw him. She walked right up to him. She took him by the shoulders and gently shook him, and she said, old man, wake up, open your eyes, look around you. Nobody's here. Nobody's listening. Nobody cares about your stories. Why don't you just pack up your things and go home and do something useful with your time? Well, the old man opened his eyes and he smiled at her and he said, you know, when I was a young man, I used to come here and tell my stories to change the world. Now I come and I tell my stories to stop the world from changing me. And as the young girl listened to him and looked deep into his eyes, she saw a wisdom and a kindness and a mystery that opened a deep sense of curiosity and wonder in her heart. And to her own great surprise, she found herself opening her mouth and saying, "Will you teach me how to tell stories?" And so this young girl became the storyteller's apprentice. And very soon she was telling the stories that he taught her, but in her own way, to her friends, to other young people. And one day a whole crowd of them came to the marketplace to listen to the storyteller. And when he'd finished, they invited him to come with them to the nearby Café de France and to teach them the ancient art of oral storytelling. And I am told that his students still tell stories there to this day. This is a true story, and that is all I know. May this story bless you with the courage to persevere with whatever it is that you most deeply care about, and the curiosity to seek after that mystery that is beyond words, beyond all stories, and far, far beyond being useful.
Well, thank you, Nicola. I love that story. That's like the third time I've heard it, and every time I hear it, I love it so much. And again, it goes back to that you talked about the work that you do. And the message of that story comes through so clearly that they're almost identical, the work that you're doing, and whether you've changed the story to make that more aligned with you or not, I'll have to do some research, but it's pretty awesome. I really, really liked it.
Yeah, it's very true to the story that I heard Roy tell. And when he told it, it was he had us all make up our own endings.
Ah,
And
nice.
so I made up my own ending for the story. But the ending that I created for the story is based on the story he told us after the story, which was about how he went to Morocco and met some of these young storytellers who
Oh,
had been
wow.
taught by some of the older storytellers. So
Yeah.
it's not exactly true, but I think there were some older storytellers that were invited to come to the cafe, teach these younger ones. And now this storytelling tradition is very alive, apparently, and
Yeah. Yeah,
continuing.
wow.
Yeah.
I really love the idea of a mentor. And in fact, my one of my first interviews I did was with Tamas, and he said that every storyteller needs to find a mentor, and I really love that idea. And had I stayed in Tasmania, he would have probably been my mentor. But
Mm,
it's just, I think it's about finding the right mentor at the right time, because I think it's not always easy. But I love that
yeah.
apprenticeship model as well, and learning from the ones who came before. Such
Yeah.
a special gift, I think, to be able to give.
Yes. And when the student is ready, the teacher will come. So trusting that the teachers will come, and maybe there'll be a series of them.
Yeah, yeah,
So
for sure.
Randy Jones also has been a wonderful mentor to me, and Jaya,
Yeah,
Melissa. And I carry them all in my hearts, and I think about them before I tell my stories. I kind of like imagine them standing behind me and
yeah,
supporting me in telling the story.
yeah. Wow. Oh, that's wonderful. And so, do
Mm.
you have any standout moments in storytelling where you've told a story and something extraordinary happened, or
Probably my most recent experience of telling this particular story down in Denmark really made my heart sing, because I told it in an interactive way. So I had everybody contribute images for the patchwork quilt from the
oh wow,
stories that
yeah,
they'd already heard that evening. And I also had them, I paused the story and got them to think about something that they had really deeply cared about and maybe persevered with, or maybe not. And then I had them make up their own endings in groups of 3. And the whole room was just a buzz. I could feel that people were a bit resistant at first, but once they were into it, they were into it. And then after I finished my version of the story, we heard about 6 or more of their versions, and they were fantastic. And they were
yeah,
just
wow,
like every teller was really different in their style of telling. And it was just like, wow, we've got a room full of budding storytellers here. Like, you all need to get up here and tell some stories.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, I love that. I think we definitely need more people telling stories in the world. And I think
Mm,
having worked in schools for a very, very long time, I think what children and young people have missed is the traditional tales because they don't know how to defeat the dragon, as Neil Gaiman says. They don't know how. And oh, I've got tingles. Like I think that if they were told the story in the old ways, they might have the tools that they need to be a bit more resilient.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to hear more about your project, because I know that this is part of your dream of going to Emerson, is being able to bring some of these stories back. And
Yeah,
Mm.
I absolutely do. Well, thank you so much, Nicola. I really appreciated your time today, and let's catch up soon.
Yep. Thank you, Ali. Thank you.
Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling, and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.